Like I was trying to explain, there was a song that I absorbed somewhere in my lifetime, but it really speaks to a sense of how we adorn ourselves. And I think that's the key element when I started looking at the kind of creativity I do is all in adornment. So just to give you a sense of that song that I was too nervous to sing at that time, it goes Ampo wiki kola wayelo. Ampo wiki kola wayelo. Ampo wiki kola wayelo. Chonglish kale koyag mayelo. Ampo wiki kola wayelo. Ampo wiki kola wayelo. Ampo wiki kola wayelo. Chonglish kale koyag mayelo. So the composer of that song talks about the son at his friend and how he wears a sacred hoop. That really kind of speaks a lot to the idea of we as Lakota people, and I think a lot of us right now are wearing something that defines us, whether we wear it somehow or we have it to use at certain times. But I know, like I mentioned, I grew up as a little boy with a dance outfit. That really defined me, I know. And it seems like whenever I put my regalia on, I get transformed into somebody that I guess I really like. Yeah. But anyway, so the idea of what I do has a lot to do with things that came from the past. They're not just something that was trendy in the 1970s called Indian jewelry. Today, that's boomed into a big industry now with silver and turquoise and such like that. But we up here in the Northern Plains have defined a sense of our identity with metal as well, but not so much the turquoise. But I will talk about what the future could hold for us in our own creativity with materials that we have right in our homeland here. So this is a historical perspective I'm going to talk about because when I decided that I wanted to pursue this whole idea of Plains Indian silverwork, it was born out of some sense of curiosity and understanding ourselves a little better. But I was educated with a degree of museum studies, and within that discipline, you also required to do presentations and research and such like that. But and also some techniques for learning how to preserve and exhibit and such. So that I have all that background, but that was probably the emphasis and the basis for me going forward to understand we as Lakotas and what we do. So I say Plains metalwork is an intrinsic indigenous art form, personal adornment. It's something that we can all relate to as indigenous people because we redefined ourselves. We can walk down the street and we see somebody and what they're wearing, and it's like, oh, I get it, I get it. That's that's cool. It's kind of a sense of our own identity. I'm going to harken back to the beginning of when we started implementing metal back in the 1600s, and this date actually has a lot to do with the fur traders. In fact, I really kind of admire the fact that they came here and they discovered all this fur, and we as Native people had been living and existing with that commodity and clothing ourselves and even adorning ourselves and all that. But then they seen it as a product. But I think one thing I can say about that whole process was when those traders came, yeah, they were exploiting our resources, but for some reason, we as Native people found ourselves part of a world economy as well, providing furs to Europe. But in the meantime, those traders actually treated us as equals. They brought us things to trade, and we had things to give to trade back. So we had a mutual relationship at one time with with non-natives. But there again, that's a whole discussion to talk about what they brought to us. But those things, what they brought to us were wire, brass tacks, sheet metal. And one of the sheet metals was German silver alloy. And that's what I really kind of discovered I wanted to work more with, although I do delve into using sterling silver and such. But I really like the German silver because it has no precious metal content. What is good about it is the aesthetic of putting designs on it and its use. So it develops a whole different kind of a value rather than its precious metal content. So I still use that today, and I do my best to keep it at a level of creativity where my work on top of it actually makes it worth a lot more. So metals that came to us were tools such as knives, axes, chisels, files, cookware, needles, and scissors. So when I started looking at museum pieces that were made in the mid 1800s, I seen all that fringe cut on all our clothing and all that. And I was like, well, they used to do that with sharp flint and knives, but here they discovered they have scissors. So that really kind of enhanced our ability to do custom clothing with with fringes and such. So I think of what we do as Native people when we bring in new materials, new tools, doesn't change us. It really enhances us. So that's another way of looking at all these things that have come to us, because I think these new tools and technologies actually have brought my ancestors further. I have a hard time standing, so excuse me. So just to validate some of my research, not only did I read about the traders and all that, in some of their journals and such, but I validated a lot of my own research to say, ledger drawings, these guys that were drawing pictures were actually using at that time, or what I call our information technology then was actually the narrative drawing. So a lot of my research has gone into understanding what they were drawing and what they were actually informing us with. So here's a Cheyenne ledger drawing. These drawings became pretty vogue in, let's say, about the early 1990s. I remember the Colorado Historical Museum discovered the Dog Soldiers ledger book in their collection. They didn't even know they had it until they figured out what it was, and they realized that this was a record of battles that the Cheyenne Dog Soldiers had. So they learned a lot from those ledger drawings, and those ledger drawings coincide with military history. So that impressed upon me the fact that what we were doing was actually recording our own history, but from individual stories. So this really validates when you see these drawings, they actually have identity to the people for their attire, color of their horses and such. But when I started looking at them, I started seeing, well, you can see right here what he's wearing. He's got these silver hair plates, and he's got this pectoral on. That says a lot to me. It's like, man, that's the way they were dressing back then. So that kind of says, what I do is following nothing more than a continuum of what our ancestors were creating with metal, with silver sheet and such. Yeah, they got trade items, they got trinkets, all kinds of things from traders. But they took all those ideas and they transformed them into things that really were meaningful to them. So when you start seeing adornment like that, pectorals and such, it says that, they're very creative, but they really kind of brought the sense of metalwork. So when I started looking at these ledger drawings, I see all kinds of metal in there. Started looking at it, and you look at it and you see all these features, that armbands, hair plates, things like that. And they traded for them, but they also made their own. So that's kind of really interesting. That really got me excited about the whole idea of because at the time back in the 70s when I was going to school, like I said, the industry of Indian jewelry was pretty vogue from the Southwest. But there's another thing that happened that inspired me even more. But I realized that, Lakotas, we have things that are pretty important, but not in that vein of being an industry to make jewelry. So there again, in these drawings of the ledger, you can see these adornment pieces. That's a piece at the Denver Art Museum. You can see that they're made out of German silver. That were trade items that were cut out of sheets. Maybe I'll sit for a while. So here's a photograph from 1868. Those same hair plates that I'd seen in the ledger drawing. You can see how they wore them. And yet I'm still trying to find out what it is that they're showing with these kind of things, some kind of affluence or something. But anyway, they adorn themselves with this metal. And these are Lakotas. Southern Plains were just as well adorned as well in the Plains Indians. In fact, it's been documented back in 1848, the Kiowa had a Sundance. They call it the flat metal Sundance because they too were exposed and received flat metal and making jewelry there. So that's kind of interesting. As far back as 1848, they were starting to generate and make adornment out of metal. Okay. So we get into an era of the late 1800s. This is one of the, oh, thank you. This is one of our chiefs, Oglala Lakota, young man afraid of horse. When I seen his portrait, that really inspired me too. So he defined himself not with a Christian cross, but with a star. And then I like his earrings. He has hoops and he's got chains hanging there from them. That's pretty cool. But these men really had a sense of identity and self that they defined themselves like that by just distinguishing themselves. And this cross in my early investigations and research, I found this cross. It was an Oglala cross, and it presently resides at the Museum of the Fur Trade right there in Chadron. And I've spent several times in going to Chadron to do research and such. This last time I went down there last fall, I'd rediscovered more stuff. There was a whole box of old time silver making tools, metal tools, but that were belonged to the traders and the native people. But this cross really impressed me because I was just starting to understand this adornment and replicating and trying to do things myself. But this really impressed me for the fact that yes, it's symmetric in itself, but it's got these repose formed crescents, and he's got stamp work on there. He only had one stamp, but he's able to convert that stamp into other kind of designs. And even to cut out that square thing meant he had a cold chisel and files. And what really amazed me was that little heart that he cut out on the top there like that. So it's like these are technical feats with using rudimentary tools, but yet it's pretty amazing what our Lakota people were making back then, you know.
So do you believe that he did that himself?
Somebody did. Somebody did. Yeah. So there's another Lakota named Chief Ironhawk. When I seen this picture, I said, oh man, that says a lot. Then it says, well, the metal, we transitioned from stone arrowheads into metal at some point in time. And those arrowheads were also trade items as well that the traders discovered that native people really needed them. So they made arrowheads for us. But we also made our own too out of wagon wheel rungs, the rims, and we used broken kettles, things like that. We made, yeah, we made our own arrowheads too as well. So, but then he converted those arrows into on his wapeganaka. So that's kind of an interesting form of adornment with these arrows. But there again, that's not a Christian cross. That's a star symbol or something. Yeah, I just get amazed that, and these people were not influenced by the outer world. They were making things that determined their own worldview and their own value system and such. So there again, this is the 1800s, and there again, you'll see these well-defined adornment pieces, the hair plates, the pectoral hanging at the bottom of his breastplate. It's just amazing, our ancestors, how they really like to adorn themselves. Proud people, well-defined, you know. And I think the way they presented themselves not only displayed their affluency, but their family pride, you know. And I always think to myself, how do we interpret that the way our ancestors used to present themselves in special occasions? And how do we do that today? Today we show up in major events with sweatpants on. You know, I just kind of, that dichotomy is like, what the heck, you know? So when I see these things like this, is that it just makes me feel better about a time when we were well defined and had pride in our appearance. This is another Lakota ledger drawing. So there again, you can see that pectoral he was wearing. Yeah, what happened to all that stuff? I figure they got buried with them. You know, guys, they're kind of hard to find in the museums here and there. And I've always looked in museums for pieces like that. And I've seen a few of them. And I understand the imagery that they inscribed on them was pretty, pretty rudimentary. But then that also inspired me. And as I go on to describe my work, I did study under a gun engraver and learned how to engrave to those special designs that needed to be expressed. So this piece on the left here was from the 1600s. That was from the Hudson Bay Company. I happened to see this at a Western memorabilia show in Scottsdale, Arizona, and there was the age on that, and that was a trade item. So you can see these trade items inspired Native people to make their own too as well. That one had Christian crosses on it and crescents. But then there again, we started making our own. This was made by Shoshone, and I don't know who made that one, but you can see the designs on them. And those are what they call rocker engraved. And that's a technique I've mastered since. So more examples of some historical pictures. These are Arapaho gentlemen over in Fort Robinson, I think it was, if I remember. But they got silver rings on, and they got pectorals. They got brass tacks on their vests and stuff. So this idea of metal has been filtering in and used in adornment as well as tools. I like to talk about this one. You know, I was just talking to my colleague here, Keith. I said, with this picture, he's glad to see that woman's picture. He said, that looks like a good subject for a painting. But to me, there's a story behind that. But what it speaks to me when I see these old time pictures is how comely our ancestors were. Hair well combed, got some accent earrings on. You can see that she's got about four pairs of those ball and cone earrings all gathered. So to even acquire them from traders meant you had to be productive to get something like that. But I can see the brass bracelets she's wearing. She has a lot of pride in them and kept them polished. Kind of reminds me of a day when my grandmother presented herself with accent jewelry, just kind of a sense of humility, but pride and extinguishment as far as how you carry yourself and represent your family, you know. So those are the things I see when I see this adornment, and that has a lot to do with the basis of what I like to do for people with what I do. And I call these pictures like this high fashions on the plains. In fact, we as Lakotas are still setting the fashions in the plains. Got all these fashion shows and what all's the imagery that we're using? They all come from the Northern Plains. So you can see we've always been trendsetters. Dentalia has come back, but we were using dentalia a long time ago. Yeah, and those metal belts, I mean, we were able to trade and get those discs. Just recently, I've seen boxes and boxes of those belts at the Sioux Museum, the Duhamel collection. I got to see parts of it, and this is what the Lakotas were selling. They must have fell into hard times, and the women had to sell their belts at the Duhamel store. So anyway, so they became valuable in the sense they had to, just like down in the Southwest, they had to pawn their jewelry. Well, the native people up here had to sell their things, to survive. But nonetheless, you could see what I call the high fashions on the plains, the beadwork, the metalwork, all of that. It just elevates us to, and just kind of makes you wonder. The non-natives never had that kind of sense of personal pride. But for some reason, my ancestors really elevate themselves, although they were mobile people. Somehow they invested a lot of their creativity in what they wore. I'm still pondering, what does that really mean? What does it say? It says to me that you have an identity. You have something worth preserving and presenting. So I look at all these things and I'm just amazed at how we adorned our clothing and used accent metal and all that to actually define more of the way we present ourselves to the world. And these are just examples of some old discs that were stamped with designs and all that. And you can see that they kind of oxidize, but that's the metal, German silver. It does oxidize after many years. Yeah. But still, it gives off a nice warm glow. Okay, so here's another drawing. Yeah, I see all the personal adornment, but what I really recognize in this one was that headpiece. Horses up here in the Northern Plains had silverwork. And I did get to see a couple of old pieces like that. Not too many of them in the museums, but I did see one down in a museum in Santa Fe that was made by the Hunkpapa. But yeah, that's pretty cool. And there used to be a story about these headdresses. If your horse got killed, you had to take that headdress off. I mean that bridle off. So even that was somehow a brave act to do, is to unbridle your horse and not just leave it there like that. But so that was one of the prized possessions that belonged to the horse. It was not just an adornment piece; it was the horse's adornment piece. So there's all kinds of things you can interpret from these kind of drawings and how they adorned their horses as well. So here's the old piece that I've seen. This one here is all what they call rocker engraved. That's taking the sharp metal and just rocking it back and forth to create a design on there. So these are just very early forms of engraving, but I can recognize what they were trying to accomplish in adorning their horses with imagery. That's kind of an interesting design, these two hands and all that. So you'll see all these kind of things that, yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, there's all kinds of influences that we've adapted. I mean, the naja is one that the Navajos use in their squash blossoms. Yeah. That's one thing. We are inspired by many different places and forms. And I got to see how they're constructed. So this all kind of helped me define the next generation. I made several of these. I did make one and entered it in a pop show, and it got bought right away by the National Museum of the American Indian. So it didn't even get circulated around for other people to see. It was gone just like that. But that's my inspiration, is to keep making these kind of things to bring an idea, because all of a sudden horses are coming back to our people again. We need to have parades and dress up and all that again. So you can see this history of adornment. There's a pesha here with a spreader. Originally, historically, they're made out of shoulder blades of buffalo, elk, and such, and they were carved. But then when there was no more of that, we kind of had to turn to metal. So there again, you get to see a metal spreader. So there are a few of these Northern Plains people that still use metal like that, but anymore people use all kinds of other materials. But historically, we transitioned from raw material from the land into trade items of metal and such. But there again, you can see this technique of rocker engraving. And that's one technique I really still depend on because it's historical to me. Yeah. Now that's a very interesting map because you can see these dates. They go back to the 17th century, 1700s. These are trade items brought to us by the British people that were traded to the northeastern tribes. And those things all went all the way across to the Great Lakes. And you can see the Spanish, they also brought silver to trade. So you can see the trade items that would come into, but all of this historically converged in Oklahoma. All the tribes that were displaced from these different areas brought trade items and they started replicating them. And so Oklahoma became this center of Plains Indian silverwork, Southern Plains. And out of that is where my inspiration came because you could see trail going up to the Northern Plains and that peyote rattle there is one of the mediums of what modern day silversmiths have been able to export up to the Northern Plains. And I'm one of the ones that really got inspired by what the Plains Indians were creating down there. But all those influence of metalwork from different trade routes came into Oklahoma. Kind of interesting. So in my work, I've been able to comprise a list of what I call the modern era of prominent Southern Plains German silversmiths. So they range from being Pawnee, Sac and Fox, Arapaho, Kiowa, Kickapoo, Comanche, and Cheyenne. They all adapted the metal like that, and all of them in the modern era were creating what they call peyote jewelry, making jewelry that was very adaptable to the Native American church religion. So here's an example of a Kiowa scarf slide. So you can see that scarf slide going through, and that's all made out of German silver. So when I look at that, that's a technical feat to do all that kind of work. So you can see all kinds of advancement in metalwork and creating designs. You can see the peyote religion reflected in the crescent and the crossfire. The peyote bird, which is the cormorant, which is a water bird. The peyote button, teepees, earrings. And what I like about the Southern Plains is all their earrings, and I think you got a pair on, I just noticed. What I like about them is they articulate. And in fact, that impresses me because whenever I try to make things, I know people like to wear them, and when they dance, they dance with you. So these things actually start imbuing a sense of a spirit too, and they dance with you. They move, they articulate. Yeah. Then I understand the teepee for the Native American church is the embodiment of their belief system. But when we as Lakotas using our teepee imagery, do we really understand what we're using anymore? To me, the teepee has 13 poles that represent 13 uh, 13 moons in a lunar year. And then the sense of the circle, and there's always an altar in the teepee. Uh, it's the basis for the Kapemini design, which represents the earth and sky, and how this teepee is this model of actually protocol and social mores that are extended in there for a social system that lived in open space with no walls. So they had all these places, seats of honor, chatku in the back. All these things are so represented in these kind of imagery like that. So that's kind of the things that I try to incorporate and talk about when we're doing things. They have great meaning, and we can talk about that and reinforce our beliefs. So this is where I kind of mentioned in my talk this morning about this idea of spiritual intelligence. That goes into our creativity, our true creativity. These are fine examples of hair plates that they have cut out so you can thread the leather all the way through that, and you're wearing that as a scalp lock. Scalp locks are an evolution. At one time when in warfare, you would taunt your enemy with your scalp lock, you know.
That's what the representation of that is?
Well, it's one of them. There's many different kinds. Yeah. So even us, when we wore wapaganacas too, we had a braid back there that we taunted people with. These are Southern Plains earrings. I've made a few as well because I really like them. You can see they kind of evolved from a hunting culture by the arrowheads, you know. But then you can see that they have all this imagery and geometric designs on them in circles, but they articulate as well. When you move, they have spirit. They move with you, just like fringes on clothing. They move. Shkan, they call that shkan, shkan, shkan. And these water birds, yeah, these are tie slides. These are adornment pieces, earrings. So I started really looking at all these things and getting inspired by the Southern Plains, what they're doing with their peyote jewelry. So one of my heroes, I guess I could say, one of the silver workers I really got inspired by and actually got to acquire a few of his pieces. When I was in school, there was another student. She was from Tama, Iowa, and her family knew Julius Caesar, so she had pieces, and I traded. But when I started studying his work, I realized that he had mastered the techniques of saw work, stamping, filing, repoussé, rocker engraving, line engraving, and overlay soldering. Just in that one piece, you could see that. You can see that silver ball was raised. He soldered a brass heart on top of there. He soldered a teepee on there. And he did stamping. He engraved these. It's just amazing. And that's a scarf slide. And people really dress up for their peyote meetings.
So the TP and heart, piece of metal laid on top of it?
Yeah, they're soldered on top. It's an overlay soldering. Yeah.
Same metal?
Yeah. No, with the brass or another colored metal. Yeah. Yeah, it's just amazing. All these techniques that were mastered. And these were his tools. And when I seen tools like this, it says to me that I better learn how to make tools. So all the tools I have, when you see my lab up here, I mean my studio, you see that a lot of the files and things that I've used to make my own stamps. Very few did I buy, from a jewelry supply store, but I made all my tools and such too, because that defines your work. So you have to learn a little bit about being a blacksmith to make your own tools, how to anneal and temper metal. But that's what he did. He had blocks and stuff. He used broken files, old punches. I mean, that impressed me as his tools. So some of these are his really exquisite pieces. The cormorant, and he's got all those techniques mastered: overlay soldering, stamping and engraving, and just the aesthetic design of a cross with the cormorant on it, the water bird. And this is really interesting. That's the altar in a peyote ceremony with right here in the center is where they put the peyote button. But he's used the horizontal expression of the water bird across that altar. Kind of interesting. That's. So he to me, he was a master in silver work, but he mastered all those techniques, but then knowing enough about the religion and the water bird and all that, he was able to come up with these kind of imagery. And This is all wearable art. I call it wearable art.
Is that actual size or is it?
No, no, these are skins, scarf slides. Sure, you can do sculptures like that. In fact, I have a cross up there that I made many years ago, and some lady came by my studio here a couple weeks ago. I want one just like that. I said, well, you gonna wear it? No, I just want to hang it on my wall. Okay. Now this piece really blows me away. German silver peyote jewelry. So the features is saw work, repose, making two halves of a spear, soldering them together to make a bead, and then forming the cones. But the engraving and stamp work and just the design of the eagle, the peyote button, the pipe, the crescent altar, and you know this is from Oklahoma because you'll see the scissor tail swallow on there, and then you'll see the cormorant, the water bird on that side. I mean, just aesthetically and designs, it incorporates so much of a belief system of the Native American church as a hybrid with the pipe, you know. There again, this idea of spiritual intelligence and infused and incorporating in your design work, you know, you come out with beautiful things. And yet to a non-native, they wouldn't recognize all that. But to a native person, that means the world, you know. Yeah. So up here in the northern plains, I've done what I could to find out who does work up here. Mitch Zephyr, he and I banter with each other at one time of who started doing this first up here. I did. I go back to the 1970s when I started doing this kind of work, and I've been evolving since then, you know. But but Mitch, I have to give him a lot of credit because he did a lot of work around here. He's influenced a lot of other younger people like Tim Irwin Soldier, and but these are some other ones that just recently. Chico Hermany Horse is a good friend of mine. He's Well, yeah, he's seen some of my work. He said, I can do that, John. Well, he had actually invited me out to because he teaches at the uh, Wyoming Indian High School, and he said, "Can you come up here and do a presentation on your civil work?" So I did that for the high school up there. But yeah, he started doing some work. Yeah, and Jean Roach, she lives here in Rapid City. She makes blingy kind of jewelry, which is kind of cool. And then Nelda Shrump, everybody knows her. She does some really kind of avant-garde metalwork and such, but nonetheless, very creative. And she's from Canada. And there's some more guys around here, the Northern Plains, Gail Reencounter, Mike Haskell, Robert Sunbear. All these people you'll be able to see at Prairie Edge. So their style of jewelry that is kind of reaching into the more of the retail marketing rather than for the culture. So we're starting to see some dichotomies here of why people create sometimes, you know. So these are all guys. I mean, they got. You can go down there today and you'll see all the work in there. So that stuff I was showing you from the Southern Plains, you don't see that in the retail market very much because it's all made within the culture for the culture, and some of that might be bought by other people, but it's not a very prominent kind of offering anywhere because it's all made for the culture. Let me talk a little bit about Mitch because when I seen his stuff, I said, "Yeah, I get it," because he's using imagery and form to express a cultural view. So if I talked about this disc here, he's got the image of the pipe in Inipi, and he's got 7 feathers there, and he's got all these little pieces around here that represent, the rocks, and he's got smoke coming out of that pipe with the buffalo in a dream fashion. I think that was pretty cool. And then, of course, he's got the buffalo and the medicine wheel and all that in the bracelet. And this piece too, He's got imagery of 4 feathers and three items there. That's 7. He's got the Humblecha scene there with a man holding a pipe. He's using some colored stones there for the medicine mirror, the Changleshka, the 4 colors. Yeah, and the eagle in the background. It's just all in one form expressing Lakota spirituality in metal rather than, in imagery of painting or whatever. I thought that was pretty cool. That was some of his early work, you know. He really created some interesting pieces, and he too mastered the jeweler saw, metal overlay, lapidary work, crushed stone inlay, bezel stone setting, stamping. Yeah, so those are techniques that he mastered. But all those kind of things are very reminiscent of the techniques that were done in the Southwest by the Navajo. So you can see the dichotomy and difference between Southern Plains, you know, and because they didn't use that many stones, but this one kind of expresses more of color incorporated in metal now. So much like the horses in the ledger drawings that had metalwork on them, Mitch took it to another level by decorating a motorcycle. I don't know. I think that's pretty funny and cool at the same time. And this is just a recent piece that was brought to me yesterday by Art Zimica. He said, I got this from Mitch. He said, it's on a pedestal, but I want to wear it. You think you can figure out a way that you can make this into a pendant? So I said, okay, let me look at it. But there again, this features some of the, I don't want to call it whimsical, but these are things that Mitch was doing but a lot of things he's done is kind of moved into uh, kind of the retail market. You could say that around here, but but he uses a metal there that's called a silver overlay, which is a base metal of copper with silver plating on it. And then brass. I cleaned it up a little bit, but it was pretty tarnished because that brass really tarnishes easy, you know. And these are some things, like I mentioned, these gentlemen that provide products for Prairie Edge, so you can see. But they use I call it a fox inlay, because it's crushed stone with epoxy, and it's inlaid in these are overlaid 2 pieces of metal, but then he creates a cavity that they fill it in with crushed stone and epoxy. So it's not true inlay, but it is inlay to a certain extent. But these are pretty iconic images that are for sale down there at Prairie Edges. Yeah. So this is some of my early work when I first started seeing things from the ledger drawings. I wanted to just try it. But then I was also learning how to engrave, so you can see some of the features and designs I use are a little more refined in creating. But rocker engraving was pretty much the strength and element I was using to define designs and such. But these are the things that are still relevant to wear today, as well as what our ancestors invented and wore back then in the 1800s. Yeah. So this was I made for my son when he was a little guy when he danced. He had long hair and he had a braid, so I put that on him. But yeah, that's historical, but it's also very creative, and
It's cool.
yeah, and it stands with the time. You still wear things like that today. So I started getting into engraving, and there again, you can see rocker engraving techniques, but I do bright cuts with really sharp tools. And there again, I had to create my own engravers and temper them to make sure that metal can cut metal. Yeah, so these are just geometric designs that I was able to put on bracelets. Some more of my early work that are kind of iconic, and I still depend on some of the imagery like that to do my creative work with. Tate Dopa, Wombly, and Parflesh designs, and things like that. These are all German silver. Uh, that's probably one thing another part of me, a lot of people don't know, but I kind of bonded with the cowboy culture. And to this day, I get asked to still make buckles and stuff. But so I've done buckles, and I've done a couple of cool buckles. I think one was my friend of mine, Apache guy. His father passed away, and he wanted to have a memorial dance contest for his dad, who danced Southern style. So I made that buckle for prizes for the championship of the dance contest. And then brother-in-law of mine, he was a bus driver. So all these things, just to make the point, a lot of these things have stories. They're created for a reason, you know. And he was a bus driver, and he said, I had this one student. She wanted to quit school, and I kept talking to her and calling. And finally, he said, she made it through high school. He said, can you make a buckle for her for her graduation? Okay, well, so he told me the story about her. He really fought to get her through high school. So I made this and said, "Oh yeah, she's a fancy shawl dancer." So I made a fancy shawl dancer there and put her name on her, Jennifer Crow, and made this trophy buckle for her. But that's the point of what I still believe in doing, is making things that are meaningful for individuals. And that one there was a series champion. I used to do a lot of team roping. Right now, I consider myself a recovering ropeaholic. Yeah, but I love that. It's one of the ultimate sports you can do on horseback, because you have to have a trust in your horse and your horse trusts you. Both. Yeah, I used to wrestle steers too, but and yeah, so well, I made a brand buckle for a colleague one time, and next thing you know, I found myself making uh, rodeo trophy buckles. And I was commissioned one time by the Women's Pro Rodeo to make their buckle series, and so I've had. So that's another thing a lot of people don't know, but a lot of my techniques I mastered goes into these kind of high-end techniques. And this one here I made for an art exhibit that Keith put together called "We Are a Horse Nation." I didn't, I got asked to do something and for that exhibition, and I just think I can't do anything from the 1800s because I didn't live there then. But as a Lakota, we still relate to horses, and so these two bronc riders represent um, two of my cowboy heroes. One is Art Lawrence from the Cheyenne River Reservation. When I was a little boy, I used to admire him as a bronc rider. And the other one up there is another gentleman I met later in life, was Joe Chase. He covered this famous bucking horse called War Paint. And when I was visiting with him, he said, "John, do you think you can make me a buckle?" Because I covered that horse. Uh, he said, "I never got anything for it, but I got a story." I said, "Sure," but so before I could make it for him, he passed away. But anyway, so I decided when I make something for this, We Are a Horse Nation, I would commemorate these two cowboy heroes of mine in a belt buckle. So that's what I mean. Things have stories. That's the way I like to make things, that they mean something. So more of my engraving, that's a nice bracelet, just kind of showing some of the engraving techniques I mastered. And every now and then, I've made lots of these tiaras for powwows. And there again, they're things that people can use today, things that are ordered. I just don't make them and hopefully hawk them somewhere or whatever. But this was made out of copper for the UCLA powwow royalty fan. In California, they're their mascots, the Bruins. So I put two bear paws on there with the TP and all that kind of. There again, see, these are custom orders that I really enjoy making. These are all engraved designs and such like that. I thought that's pretty cool. I like that out of copper though. Copper is another cool metal, I think. And then for a period of about 20 plus years, I made the award jewelry for the Native American Rights Fund. They give out a board pin, so I thought I do the imagery of a wapaha, a chief's bonnet, and that's their iconic symbol is their feather. So these are brooches I made and things for the Native American Rights Church. I mean, Native American Rights Fund. And I was really honored. I never tell anybody these things that I do, but I did that for about 20 some years. Yeah. And I made other designs too, but these are some ones I just happened to take pictures of. And this is one of my other iconic designs I really like. It's this agate with the buffalo on it. There's a relationship between that agate that's found on the prairies of South Dakota and the buffalo. Somehow they managed to interrelate, I was thinking. But there again, that's rocker engraving. See all that little, those are hand moves like that, little tiny. And I'm still able to do that, but you can see all the fine rocker engraving I've done on those earrings there too. Yeah. Now this whole deal about agates, that's something that came to me as a spiritual gift, and there's a long story behind all that, but just to talk about these agates and these agates uplifted in the when the Black Hills were uh, in an uplift, and that coincides with our Great Race story, because we say while the Great Race was going on, the rocks were piling up in the middle of the racetrack. Well, amongst all that rocks was that were uplifting were these agates. They were in the limestone under heat and pressure of 4 different oceans, the last being the over inland ocean over this whole area. So all you can think of all the trace minerals and things seeping into that limestone, forming these agates, and then coming up in the uplift of the Black Hills. So that's about a half a billion years ago, geologic time. And what makes them so rare is because they were formed in water. All other agates are formed in igneous rock formations and metamorphic rock formations, but limestone sedimentary, and that's formed by water. So these, when I started really thinking about these agates, and they really look amorphic. You could see how fluid they were, all the trace minerals. These things were actually alive with the gel of silica and all that. They were moving and pulsing, and you can see all these different designs in them. So to me, to actually understand this, these are, I call them tashi, which are the close relatives to the first rock, because they were formed in water, you know. So I was asked to be part of another one of Keith's arts exhibits, the creation story. So I did make a sculpture utilizing agates from this homeland. They're only found here in the Black Hills and the Badlands. So there again, when I think about the future of creativity for Lakota people, there's so many things around us that we can be using to express our creativity and not be expressing our identity with U.S. history. We need to keep going with the world's history, with the globe's history. Yeah. But that's a gift from creation, I could say. And I was actually gifted by a collector. He said he's seen my website and he had all these agates, these Fairburn agates, and he said his family didn't want them. They're in the way. He couldn't sell them. Nobody in his family wanted them. He asked me if I wanted to have them. I said, only if you let me make you something, I said. And he sent to me about 60 pounds of agates. So that's another thing that I say. I can't capitalize on things that were given me. So I try to be fair about what it is I use. So those of you that want to look at my studio after this can see some of the things I've cut and polished. That's how I let people look at things like that. Maybe they connect with one or something. So some of the expressive pieces I made, with some of the engraved designs and using the agates and some imagery. Yeah. And there's just a full array of different. And when I cut and polish these stones, sometimes the designs determine the shape of the how they're going to be. So they're not always what I call in perfect form. They're just different forms. So that's and if you notice, my silverwork's very simple because it ain't about me. It's about the stone. So when you look at these things, they're all agates. You don't even look at the silverwork, but it's just very because I don't like to put too many distractive decorations around my silverwork to detract from the stone. But they're beautiful, just in every color that you can imagine. Yeah. This was a custom order by a lady who really had an affinity to that agate when she's seen it. Yeah. And it kind of looks like a buffalo, that agate in there, the pattern. So, yeah, so it became a buffalo design. There again, those are designs that come from the agate itself, the articulated, uh, what we call them, banded images. Oh, these are examples of some other silverwork I like to do, but they all have meaning. This has 7 balls on it, 7 things. Seven's a good number in our culture. Just something a little more contemporary, but it still carries the philosophy of agate from our homeland and the 7 sacred ceremonies that we still adhere to. And that one there was that pendant on the side that was created for my son's mother-in-law. She has some of an ancestry of Scottish and British, and my daughter-in-law asked if I could make a brooch for her mother. So I thought real hard, what can I do? So I entwined a Tudor rose and a Scottish thistle. So there again, things have purpose. They have a story behind them. Yeah, and I call this Lakota bling. The one on this is about that big. My sister's grandson, he was in some film, and they're debuting the film over in Cairns, Italy. And he said, "Grandpa," he said, "can you make me some Lakota bling, something for I can wear at the opening of the premiere of this movie?" So I made him that. It's a buffalo image with a big agate in it. Yeah, and that's just something whimsical I made with the Indian head pennies because I like copper. Because this agate spoke to me. I figured it needs a copper base to it. Yeah, and that's just a handmade chain. So I just call it Lakota bling. And there are some other things that I made. You see, the women wore those beaded strike-alike bags, and they always had a awl on them. I decided to make one out of metal and put a German silver plate on it, and it's a pouch in a sense, and it has an agate button on it. And all these little dangles on the bottom are carved pieces of buffalo hoofs and some dew claws. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, just something unusual. And this one here was for another exhibition. It's called the Treaty of 1868. And I was thinking, what can I really make? Because I was asked to be in that. Couldn't think of anything, but I thought, well, that's the kind of imagery that jewelry or adornment chiefs wore in those days. So I made this and I engraved on there Fort Laramie Treaty, 1868, Oglala Lakota. And had these 2 hands shaking on there like that. Yeah.
Wow.
And those are agates that are cut and polished and I don't know, I don't want to call them whimsical, but these are things that just kind of I don't know how they happen, but they do. But I call it wearable art, the art of personal adornment, cut, shaped, and polished earth tone Lakota Fairbairn agate cabochon comprise the creative design for this brooch. The star set with a bright faceted garnet completes the affiliated design for the Lakota story of Tapun Shawi, the woman who married a star. While living in the star world, she went out to dig the nutritious Timsala, tubers with long taproots. As she dug them up, she saw her relatives in the world below and became homesick. She braided the Timsala into a rope and tried to climb down, but fell to her death, posthumously giving birth to Starboy. Her star husband, in his solitary grief, became the stationary North Star. And that's the basis of this adornment piece. And this was actually pleased me very much because the lady's name was Jennifer Galindo. She was a GIS, Geographic Information Specialist for the St. Gleschke University. Her and I were colleagues at a time. But she was doing some research with some students going out, surveying the land, trying to discover these Timsa plants, document them, and come back a year later and see what happened to them. And so they're doing this whole study on Timsala. But when she seen that, she really wanted to have it, so got it. She's a Timsala researcher. Yeah, no, I was really happy to see that go to somebody. And this is another piece. I call it the Rio Homble Ojuha, means a dream bag or dream holder. As a creation to help move beyond the memory and historical trauma that led to the plight of the Lakota today, this work of art invites the idea to dream again. It was said that the sacred hoop was broken at the Wounded Knee Massacre, but today we are healing again and masters of our time, of our future. The buffalo is returning, and with it our spiritual sovereignty. Iconic within Plains Indian culture, the hollow buffalo horn cap serves as a worthy receptacle for a dream. As a creative personal ceremonial adornment, it also serves as a protective talisman. So that cap is silver with an engraved Tate Topa design, and in the middle of that is a black agate that came from the Black Hills. It's a horn. It's a buffalo horn. I didn't polish it. I just left it in its natural state. And that's a braided cord, and I painted it red just to remember the ancestors that were killed at Wounded Knee. And what caused me to do something like this is because there's a time I didn't have work, and but somehow some lady discovered that I would be a good tourist guide. So I did some custom tours for people that came from Europe. And so I used to give tours at Wounded Knee and telling people that I knew all about it, where everything was, but it dawned on me later. It's like, why do we have to keep telling that same story over and over? And I started thinking of all the people that were killed there. They never got to live the Lakota way of life. But because of their passing, so many of us modern Lakota are still held in sorrow and in anger. And that's an inhibitor. And we don't really get to move forward because we're stuck in the realm of sorrow. So when I think about how do we honor those that were killed there, so me as a Lakota, I will live my life in their memory, because to be a Lakota is all these things that are so good to us, like good soup, wojapi, all these things, the wild fruit, choke cherries, all these things as we as Lakota enjoy. Let's live the best Lakota life we can in honor of those that couldn't. you know. So those kind of things actually kind of feed my creativity. I never would have thought I was doing this, but all these memories and things that I did in the past, they come to a apex of what can I do? So this in 1992, when my first art exhibit I ever went to was in Northern Plains. So this is a contrast to what I did in 2023. Learning lapidary work and cutting and polishing some Australian opals. I like them because they're formed in water too. you know. But the engraving I mastered then is all these things are melding into experiences I had that really kind of keep me moving forward. But it's still within the realm of early work to today is still the sense of a Lakota identity. That piece there has traveled. I remember when I made it, they had this first night of giving the awards at the Northern Plains Tribal Arts, and I was unknown. I was standing there looking at it. Oh, that's cool, They give it a first place. But there's other Lakotas came around. They're all looking at what's that? Where'd that come from? That's not Lakota. But you can see my engraving. I was mastering some engraving then, so that's engraved there. But anyway, it got to be later though. People started copying it, and some people even copied it for what they called computer art. But the piece was bought by the Minneapolis Institute of Art, Evan Maurer. He put it in a show called, oh, I can't remember the name of that show. But anyway, so this thing went with a traveling exhibit, along with a lot of historical art. And I thought, wow, what a millennium jump for me to first time I ever in a show, and all of a sudden it's in a traveling exhibit, with historical art. It's like, whoa. Anyway, so that really kind of scared me in a sense, It's what's funny about that was that this image, when it traveled, it became part of an example for symmetry in some art website. They're using this as an example of symmetry. So wow. And then on top of that, some lady artist in Scotland sent me an email. She said, I like that image. I found out that you're the artist. Can I use that imagery for a tattoo? Oh, okay, since you asked. It's just send me a picture of it. And she did. And the thing is this big on her back. I don't know, there's all kinds of crazy things that happen, but yeah, yeah, no, but no, I'm just saying. So this is just a so the time span of we're talking about 30 some years here of what I've been doing. The contrast when I was doing early work to now today. There I am. Yeah. Okay. Like I said, well, hopefully, if you got any questions or what, but that hopefully explains a little bit about this evolution of creativity with Plains Indian silverwork, whether it's Southern Plains or Northern Plains, but to me, I think there's a lot of open front creativity to be is part of this continuum, I guess, of creativity that can still happen. I can show you examples of the lapidary work I do because all this stuff comes from the Badlands and the Black Hills, all these agates that I use. It's rare. It comes from here. And it starts with the connection to our homeland, walking the earth, hunting for agates, meeting people and trading. There's so many things to be said about all this, but it's just new materials coming into our culture and extending our identity and actually enhancing our spiritual connections again and our creativity. Yeah. And like I said, everything I do has some sense of a story to it, and I like it like that. That's really the and I just probably in the last since I haven't been doing so much technical consulting anymore, putting more focus into my creativity, and I started taking pictures. But I'm just what I've been doing in the last 10 years. It's amazing. I said, oh my God, things I made in 10 years doesn't even count for a lot of the things I made prior years. But I'm not famous or anything like that. I just try to, like I was telling you, try to stay under the radar and just do meaningful things. Yeah, yeah. So thank you. But if there are any questions, but I will be here. You want to kind of look around in my studio and see what it is. I have some other examples of some things I made. Yeah. Questions?
There's a question on Zoom about lone fry bread.
Oapi, Wiggly, Ishnala, lone fry bread. That's me. I'm a lone fry bread. Mm.
Yeah,
Oh.
the storytelling part of it is really important because it's like when you're eating something like a fruit,
Mhm.
the storytelling part is like the fruity part of it.
Yeah.
You know, like the moodiness of whatever it is that you with.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just makes it more meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's one thing I discovered my whole life. Everything, uh, not so much contrived. They just add up to something. All your little experiences and such. Yeah. They keep adding up to something that you don't know what's going to be. That's what I think creativity is all about. You know. Yeah. Mhm. Okay. Huh? Okay.
Yeah.